time at Citi. I might not be able to, give you a perfect picture, but broadly speaking, of course, as I've said earlier already about 2 times, JP Morgan as a name stands out. Bank of America is doing a lot. I think, there is a very large trial going on, which is entering beta at the Depository Trust Clearing Corporation, DTCC as it's called, for its derivatives trade information warehouse. And the DTCC is, of course, has its membership is all of the banks that you talked about and will be in your list. So most of them are collaborating with the DTCC on this particular trial that the DTCC is running. It's been running for quite some time now, and there were some very, very substantial press releases about it earlier this year, in the past 2 months, where the project now entered beta. So they kind of succeeded in doing whatever they needed to do and proving that blockchain can actually be used to manage the trade information warehouse, which is the derivatives, trade information warehouse at the DTCC. So there is a lot of work going on over there. And again, all of these banks are participants. So it's not fair to say one bank is doing more and another one is doing less. I think all of them are equal participants because of their membership of the DTCC. And there's a lot of work going on in that particular regard. In addition to that, I think after that, right, a lot of the work happening with blockchain falls out of, just banking and then goes into, broadly speaking, financial services. So you start to look at ICE, Intercontinental Exchange, which is releasing which is going live with BACT for the futures business. There's a lot of work going on at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, again, from a futures perspective. I think you start to enter more of financial services as a domain and not just banks. But again, this call is to talk more about banks. So I wouldn't really tell you a lot about what BACT is up to and, what some of these other initiatives, are doing, broadly speaking, in U.S. financial services firms.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the banks themselves. So, for example, I'm just totally making this up. Citi is doing a lot of things and Bank of America is not doing anything, or, if there are certain applications that are very interesting to banks and certain others is maybe not. So, if you have any perspective on that. If not, it's just, the ones you told me so far, that's fine too, but I'm just wondering.
So yeah, I think it's not fair to say that, Credit Suisse is doing a lot and JP is not, or JP is doing a lot and Credit Suisse is not, or whatever, right? I think it would not be fair to characterize their involvement that way. I think what's important is to realize that, different asset classes are important for different banks because, they play to their particular strengths, right? So certain banks, from a use case perspective, broadly speaking, banks are looking at payments, of course. We talked about that, the interbank network and all kinds of stuff that they're doing with Ripple, et cetera, et cetera. They are also looking at, areas where historically there has been, a very sort of fragmented and fractured processing infrastructure. So by that, what I mean is, many of the places where there are secondary markets in given asset classes, you'll see banks kind of, trying to deploy blockchain-based solutions to address, inefficiency. So secondary loans, for example, that's another place where, many banks are actually trying to leverage, blockchain technology to see whether they can alleviate some of the friction points. The other one is in the FX space. So I believe Axoni as a startup is working with IHS Markit and trying to kind of, conceptualize a product to do equity swaps from what I remember. Axoni is doing equity swaps with IHS Markit. That is correct. So I think, yeah, that's right. So that, again, you start to see financial services firms such as IHS Markit, Reuters, etc., come together. But, many of the, large banks in this space, such as Citi, so Citi's, prime finance business was interested in this particular equity swap pilot that Axoni was running, and, had very, very good things to say about, whatever Axoni was able to do. And, I'm giving you information that is actually public. I'm not sharing anything, internal to my time at Citi. But in addition to that, I think there were some really good, quotes by Thomson Reuters as well. But Reuters isn't a bank; it's more in financial services, right? So you'll find equity swaps on Axoni being a pretty big deal, actually.
Okay. If you think about banks when it comes to sort of experimenting with technologies like blockchain, who do you think of as more innovative or experimental when it comes to new technologies? Do you have a perspective on that?
I think it's the same question as before. So I think you asked me, which bank is most innovative or investing the most when it comes to blockchain. And, like I said, it's hard to characterize it as such. Clearly JP Morgan has spent more money than pretty much anyone else, given, the amount it has invested in building Quorum. But beyond that, it's hard to kind of say one is doing more versus the other. There are asset classes of interest, and, the banks end up spending time and money on pilots for asset classes that they are interested in.
Yeah, I was thinking more from a cultural perspective. Certain organizations have a more innovative, risk-taking approach, and others are more of a follower. So I was asking more from that perspective than, blockchain theory.
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, so that is a slightly different question, I think, than before. So in my mind, the ones that stand out, again, and this is a personal observation, may not be reflective of, what others think. But the ones that stand out are actually Goldman Sachs, because Goldman Sachs has, distanced itself from a number of, public projects, because it's, been on a tear with patents. It's filed for many, many of them. So they are investing a lot of money internally in kind of, intellectual property as it relates to blockchain. Bank of America has also filed for a very large number of patents, in the blockchain space. They continue to kind of do a lot of work internally and innovate internally with, with their own technology resources. I think those two are quite different. Barclays comes to my mind, but Barclays is, has a U.S. entity, and I don't know if that is in your list of 40 banks. So if it is, then okay.
No.
Yeah. Okay. So then, I think, neither would Credit Suisse be, right? Because Credit Suisse is also based out of Switzerland, so it wouldn't fit the bill. I think the other, if you look at some of the capital that has been raised in the recent past, then you will find Wells Fargo also show up as a name. So Wells Fargo has, invested in some of these blockchain startups. I recall Wells Fargo investing in Axoni. So you'll find that they're also spending money, whenever the time is right. So that's the other one that comes to my mind.
So speaking of investing, who's taking the approach of, pretty strong partnerships and investments versus who's kind of stepping away from that or not doing as much? So you mentioned
So Goldman's not doing
anyone else?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, Goldman's not doing as much as I'd have expected Goldman to do. Goldman seems to be marching on a slightly different tune. And again, I've never worked at Goldman.